What's going on, guys? My name is Kyle and welcome back to the channel. Today, we have another Lancer video. I have been putting this off for weeks because I just don't have any time, but this morning, we finally have some time. So we're gonna show her a little bit of love, give her some basic service and maintenancing that she's been needing for quite a while, and we're gonna run through it together because teamwork makes the dream work. I think. I don't know what the expression is. So we're gonna jump right in. I'm gonna jack the car up, put it up on car stands, and then I'll run you through exactly what we're doing today and show you what we're gonna need. Buckle up. Okay, now that she's up on jack stands, let's quickly run through some things. So right now, the oil in the Lancer is a 10W40. If you don't know what that means, don't stress. I'm gonna run you through it really quickly. Different oils are designed for different things. There's a bunch of different oils out there. There's a bunch of different numbers on the oils, and sometimes that can be quite daunting. I know it was for me when I first started working on cars, but I'll make it kind of simple for you. So before we talk about the numbers, I'll quickly run you through a couple of different oils that you can use with your car. You have a fully synthetic oil, you have a semi-synthetic blend, and then there's other kinds of oils like high mileage or conventional motor oil. Obviously, it's going to depend completely on what kind of car you have, and it's always best to check your service manual or ask the store that you're going to be buying the oil from what is going to best suit your car. But there are different kinds of oil blends that will suit your year, make, and model better. But at least now you know there's different blends of oils that will do different things for your car.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Future Kyle. I do apologize for interrupting your video. So funny thing, turns out when I was recording all of the information about what the numbers on oil mean, my microphone wasn't connected, so we have no audio. So here I am, ready to explain to you what the numbers on the bottle of oils mean. Anyway, when you go looking for oil, you'll see there are two numbers. You have a lower number and a higher number. Now what these numbers indicate are the weight or the viscosity of the oil. The higher number will indicate how effective the oil will be at operating temperature or at around 100 degrees Celsius. Now one thing to bear in mind when we are talking about oil is it's not going to act like a liquid like water. It's better to think about oil in the same lines as maple syrup. When oil gets hot, it gets thinner, and when it's cold, it gets thicker. Very similar to if you put maple syrup in a saucepan on the stove. When it's cold, it's really thick, and when you heat it up, it starts to thin out. Easy. So now we know the second number will indicate how well it will flow in hot temperatures. The lower number will indicate how effective it is in colder temperatures. A lot of the times on oil, you'll see a 10W or a 5W, and that W essentially is going to stand for your winter rating. So on a cold morning, when you haven't run the car yet, obviously the engine is going to be cold, which means the oil is also going to be cold. So that lower number is going to indicate how effective the oil will flow in those colder temperatures. If you have an oil in the car that's say a 15W, that isn't going to flow as effectively as a 5W would in colder temperatures. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. The lower number with a W will just tell you how much better it will run in those colder temperatures. And that's it. Easy peasy. You're welcome. Now, let's go back to the video.
So this is the oil that we're going to be replacing in the Lancer today. This is a fully synthetic Penrite 10W by 50. Obviously this is a 10W, so it's going to be better for starting in cooler conditions, and this is a fully synthetic oil, not a semi-synthetic oil. Now the fully synthetics are a little bit more expensive, but in my opinion, a fully synthetic is going to be a hell of a lot better for us than a semi-synthetic, and obviously with the 10W, it's a no-brainer for us in the cold winter mornings. So that's going to cover the first part of our oil change. Now, as a general rule of thumb, every time you completely flush out and change the oil in your car, it's always suggested to change your oil filter. Now, oil filters are relatively cheap. For a comparison, I spent about $70, $80 on this 5 liters of oil, and then this cost me about 10 bucks. There is no point spending good money on some good oil and then having that filter through an old, gross, dirty filter when these are 10 bucks. So definitely grab an oil filter every single time you want to change your oil out. Okay, so that's the oil side of things finished. One of the other things we're going to be doing today is changing these. These are some platinum spark plugs. The spark plugs in the Lancer are definitely quite old. I haven't changed them since I've had them. I definitely should have by now, just because on last inspection they weren't the best. So I went out and I got some platinum Bosch spark plugs, and we're going to be replacing those today as well. Now, if you don't have a lot of experience servicing your own car, I understand that there's a big difference between just changing some oil and then taking spark plugs out and replacing them. I understand it can be quite daunting sometimes when you're, taking things out of the engine, but I'll run you through how to do it, and I promise you it is nowhere near as daunting as you think it is. Now, the last thing on our list is quite boring, but it's an air filter. I know it's not the most riveting thing to change, but it is one of those easy things that you can change yourself, and depending on where your car is being driven, what sort of conditions it's being driven in, these air filters can get quite gunky quite quickly. And with any kind of internal combustion engine, oxygen is one of the main components that you need. So having a good clean source of oxygen for your engine is never gonna be a bad thing. So I think the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get underneath the car and I'll show you exactly how to drain the oil from the engine, because before we replace any oil, we have to make sure that all of it is out of the engine so far. Once we've got the oil drained, we're gonna take out the oil filter, we'll replace that, and then we'll take out the spark plugs, change the oil filter, and then refill the car up with oil and get it ready to start. Let's do it. Okay, with our trusty GoPro camera, let me show you exactly how to drain the oil out of this car. Now with my oil filter, it's gonna sit right above here. So when you look through the engine bay, it's gonna be right here underneath the block. So I know that might be quite daunting, but I'll show you exactly what it looks like. Now with my car specifically, the easiest thing for me is to just turn my wheels at an opposite lock, and then I can reach in underneath and grab the oil filter. So let's get a pan and I'll drain the oil out of the sump. Okay, so this is what the underside of your car looks like. This is my oil filter. So you can see with me, it's covered by some engine coverings, but other than that, it's quite easy to get. So that's why I love working on this Mitsubishi specifically, because the oil filter is always really easy to get to. So next to our oil filter, we have this. This is called the sump. So this is where all of the oil collects and stays in the car before it's circulated back up through the top and then runs through the engine to keep everything lubricated. This is where it'll all collect. So knowing that this is where it collects from, this is where we're gonna drain it from. So you can see here on the left-hand side, there's a plug. Now, if we undo this plug, all of the oil will drain out of the sump. And that's exactly what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna get this drain pan. I'm gonna put this drain pan right underneath it. I'm gonna grab a ratchet. I'm gonna undo this sump plug, and we're gonna get all the oil to drain out before we take out our oil filter. If you take out this oil filter now, all of the excess oil is gonna overflow through this, and it's gonna be really, really messy. So we wanna try and eliminate that as best as we can. So I'll drain the oil out, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so for me, this is a 17mm socket. Obviously, it's gonna depend on your car, but for me, it's a 17. So let's crack this now and get some oil drained. Okay, so I've cracked the bolt, I've got it pretty loose, it's now hand tight, and this is where all the finesse comes in. It's either gonna get really messy or it's gonna be good. I don't think it's gonna be good, but let's see how we go. Okay. That is not bad. Could have been a hell of a lot worse. So we're gonna let this oil drain, get it all out of the sump, and then once this is all stopped, we're gonna take out the filter and then put the new one in. Now, one thing I don't think I need to explain, don't lose this. This is your sump drain plug. Give it a bit of a clean, put it aside, don't lose it, because you'll be very upset if you do. Okay, so now that the sump plug is out, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna crack this, which is our oil fill plug, and that's just gonna let some air pass through the engine, and that's gonna help it drain faster and make sure most of it gets out. Okay, you can see the sump has been draining for a little bit now, because you can see the oil stream is nowhere near as thick as it was when we first took the drain plug out. So a lot of the oil has already gone into the pan. What we're gonna do now is take off this oil filter, and any excess oil is gonna then drain into the pan, and we'll empty this filter. Now this is the part where you generally wanna double down how clean you've been, because if you haven't made mess with your drain plug, you're probably gonna make mess with your oil filter. Now, fair warning, sometimes these can be quite difficult to remove. I'm quite fortunate with mine. I have a lot of space to get in there and really give it a good twist, but there are tools out there that do help make this easier. They're called oil filter removal tools, and essentially what they do is wrap around the outside of the oil filter and give you a little bit more tension. One thing that I like to use that makes my life a lot easier is something like this. This is just those kitchen grip mats. I like to just wrap it around the filter. It gives me a little bit more purchase and allows me to actually crack that seal and just get this a little bit looser. So let's take this out and hopefully not make any mess. Be careful because these are full of oil, so it might be a little bit messy, but hopefully we don't have that problem. There it is. There it goes, God. And now once the oil's all out, it becomes very, very slippery. So try not to drop it into the oil pan, but once you've done that, you've successfully removed your oil filter. All right, I'm gonna let this drain, try not to make a mess, and then we'll grab the new one. So now that we've got the oil filter out, all the oil's draining out of the car, it's time we open up our new filter. So a lot of the oil filters will have a plastic wrapping. This one only has it on the end by the looks of things. So a little plastic seal, just to make sure nothing gets into the oil filter before you put it in the car. Now, some people like to do things differently with the way they put their oil filters back into the car. What I like to do is just put a little bit of oil back into the filter, and then I use some oil around the seal just to make sure it gets a nice tight seal. Some people like to fill it up all the way. Some people don't put oil on the seals. It completely depends on you. I don't really know if there's too much of a scientific factor about what way is better. That's just the way that I was taught, and it's the way that I've always done it. It might be wrong, it might not be. Don't sue me. Find out a way that works for you and go from there. Now, before I take the plastic seal off this oil filter, there is one thing that I like to do that I learned from another YouTube channel. I'll leave the link up to his channel right here. His name is Chris. If you want to learn almost anything about fixing cars, go and check out his channel. I cannot tell you how many times I refer back to his videos to learn things. An incredible creator. Go say what's up. Anyway, one of the things that he taught how to do was to write the date of your last oil change on the back of the filter. So today is the 5th of August. So underneath here, I'm just gonna write 5th and then AUG. So I know that the last time I changed this oil filter was on the 5th of August. So next time when I'm under the car or looking at other things or going to do another service on the car, I can see that I changed this oil filter on the 5th of August, and it just makes my job a hell of a lot easier the next time I go to service the car. So now that we've dated our oil filter, we're gonna take this plastic seal off the top of the filter, and we're gonna get our brand new oil, put a little bit on the inside, rub around the seam, and then we're gonna go back underneath the car and chuck it into that oil filter spot that we just removed from the last one. So like I said, I just like to get like a little layer around the seal, just like that. And once you've got the seal coated, there's a little bit of oil in the filter already, and let's go chuck this underneath. Okay, so just gonna find the thread it on, and then just make it hand tight. Like I said, you don't wanna make this, oh, we lost GoPro camera. There we go. Like I said, you don't wanna make this too tight because then it's gonna be impossible for you to remove later, but just get it hand tight until you can't really turn it anymore. And then you're good to go. Oil filter has been installed. Now that we've got our oil filter in, it's time to get your sump drain plug that we took out of the car earlier, give it a bit of a clean up, and put it back into the sump. Well, let's do that now. So when we're putting in the sump drain plug, it's essentially exactly the same thing as when we took it out. You want to get it hand tight, and then you want to get the socket wrench and make sure it's tight and down. Like I said, you don't want to make the sump plug too tight, but just make it as tight as it was when it left, and make sure that there's no oil leaking. So I'm gonna get a rag and I'm gonna clean up all these little drops of oil that are still sort of hanging onto the sump, just to make sure there's no leaks, and we'll see if anything arises. Okay, now that I've given it a clean, we can see that there's no oil coming from the sump and there's no oil coming from the filter. So everything's sealed up and it's ready for new oil. Okay, so the oil filter has been taken out and replaced, and the sump plug is back in ready to fill the engine with new oil. But before we fill it with all of the brand new oil, we're gonna change out our spark plugs. Now, like with the oil, how it depended on what kind of car you had as to what kind of oil you went for, spark plugs are really gonna depend on how many you need as to what size engine you have. So for us, this is a 4-cylinder engine, which means we need 4 spark plugs. 6-cylinder engines, you need 6 spark plugs, so on and so forth. Essentially what it does is it goes inside the cylinder itself and sparks the fuel to then provide combustion for the engine. If you don't know how many cylinders your car has, then you can always have a look online, find your make and model, and work it out from there. But for us, it's a 4-cylinder, so we need 4 spark plugs. Now what we need to do to be able to get these new spark plugs in is obviously take the old ones out. So with this car specifically, we have ignition leads that sit on top of the spark plugs, so we're gonna need to remove those out of the top of the car, have access to the old spark plugs, and then it's honestly as simple as taking the old ones out and putting the new ones in. There are a few things that you do need to check with your spark plugs before you put them in the way of the spark plug clearance, but I'll show you exactly how to check all that before we put them into the car. So let's take off all the ignition leads, take out the old spark plugs, and have a look what we're working with. Now, when we're looking at the top of this engine, I can tell you that the spark plugs are here, 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 and here, because that is where the ignition leads are. So one thing that I do like to do is I like to get a little bit of masking tape and just mark on the top of each cup what number they are, because you want to make sure they go back in the exact same way that they were when you took them out. So this is number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. I'll take them out, lay them up here on the top, take the old spark plugs out, and then when we go to put them back in, we know exactly what position they were in. All right, so I've taken all of the old spark plugs out, and one thing I did come to realize when I was taking out the second one is there's quite a bit of oil on this spark plug. So the other ones are fine, it's just this one which came from our cylinder number 2. So what that says to me is there might be a leak in one of the O-ring seals, there might be a leak somewhere else, but oil is getting into that spark plug cavity. Now, I don't know how long this has been in here. I have no idea where the last time these spark plugs were actually changed. So it could just be a long time of using them, and over time it's gotten this bad. But either way, once you see this much oil on any of your spark plugs, it is definitely something you want to look into, because it could be pointing to some more serious issues. I'm quite fortunate because it's only one of the 4 has a little bit of oil on it. So to me, that says there's a leak in one of the O-rings, but still something you want to look into. If all of the spark plugs are covered in oil, then it could mean something like your head gasket's failing, some other things are failing, so it's definitely something you want to look into. Like I said, I've only got one, so I'm quite fortunate. I think I know what it is, but general rule of thumb, if you're not confident and you take a spark plug out with oil, definitely take it in somewhere to have a look, because it could mean there's a more serious issue that you haven't seen yet. So what I've done is I've cleaned up all the oil from the second cylinder. So when we put the new spark plugs in, I'm gonna check it probably in about 3 or 4 weeks to see if there's any oil buildup on that spark plug. If so, then I know that there's a seal broken. If not, then it could just be the spark plug sitting there for a long period of time. They may have overfilled with oil. There's a couple of issues that could have come up. So we're gonna put the new spark plugs in, have a bit of a look in a couple of weeks, and just see where it's at. Now, like I said before, there are some things we do need to check with the spark plugs before we chuck the new ones in. And one of those things is spark plug height clearance. I'll show you what I'm talking about with one of the old spark plugs. So you can see here with the old spark plug, how you have that little prong right above where the threaded area is. Now that area needs to have a certain amount of clearance that allows a certain amount of arc to come from the spark plug to provide the correct amount of spark for your certain engine. Now, like I've said a bazillion times in this video, every car is different, so have a look at your car specs specifically to make sure you're finding the right clearances for your specific make, model, and engine type. Now, one thing I cannot suggest enough is to have a look into these things called Haynes manuals. I've always used these for almost every car I've bought. This one covers all the Lancer and Mirage models from Mitsubishi from 1996 to 2007. So with this being a 2004 CH, it's covered under the CH series between the years of 1996 and 2007. So essentially, what this book has is every step-by-step instruction on how to service and maintain your vehicle with everything, whether that's engine, transmission, suspension, interior components, electricals, anything that you think you might have to fix in the car, this will literally tell you how to do it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our model of car within the book and have a look at our spark plugs to see what the spark plug height clearance is gonna be for this car. So I've opened up into the engine section. Now I don't know how easy it is for you guys to see being such fine writing with the camera, but I can see here engine type all the way from the 1.5 litre to the 2.4 litre, different capacity, so the engine models. So for us, it's a 4G94, and that will tell you exactly what the CCs of the engine is, maximum power, torque, bore, compression ratio. There's heaps of information in here, but if we go one page over, I've got a whole section here for spark plugs. So we go through different engine models. So we've got a 2 litre, which puts us right in the middle, but there's also information for the 1.5s, 1.8s, 2.4s, whatever engine capacity you have. So the 2 litre engine, you can use 2 different kinds. It has the models there as to what they suggest. And then you've also got a thing here that says gap. So the gap is going to be between 1 and 1.1 millimeters. So what we want to do with our new spark plugs is make sure in that little area at the top that the gap is about 1 to 1.1 millimeters. Now, a lot of the times when you're buying certain models of spark plugs, they will already be gapped straight out of the box, but it's always a good thing to double check and make sure. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with something like this. This is called the Gapper. It's a spark plug gapping tool, and essentially it has a ridge around the outside that slowly gets thicker, and that will tell you exactly how thick the spark plug gap is. So when you take the spark plug out of the box, it'll have a little bit of wrapper right on the outside that will then expose the thread. So we're gonna have a look at this gap on the new spark plugs. So like I said, we wanna look for about 1.1 millimeters. I can actually see that it's not as open as it should be. So I need to bend that top part open just a little bit more to allow that 1 millimeter gap to fit in there quite nicely. So I'll do that now. Okay, now that I've opened it up a little bit, we're gonna have one more check, and then you can see perfectly between the 1 and 1.1, it fits in perfect. You guys can't really see that because the camera doesn't like to focus, but you're gonna have to take my word for it. So we're gonna go through and we're gonna check every single spark plug, make sure the gapping is all correct, and then we're gonna put them in the engine block. Now, one thing I like to do before I put any spark plugs in is I like to use something called anti-seize. So essentially what this does is it goes around the thread of the spark plug and it just stops the spark plug from seizing up and getting stuck inside the block. So it's just to make your life a little bit easier the next time you have to take these out and replace them. So we're just gonna put a little bit on the thread like that, and we're just gonna rub it around the thread just to make sure that the whole thread is covered. And then, like I said, once we put it in, there's no real risk of that seizing inside the block, and it just makes your life a hell of a lot easier in the future. All right, now this one's got anti-seize, let's chuck it in. Now I'm just gonna go through and I'm gonna put all of the spark plugs in with some anti-seize and just make them finger tight, and then I'll go back and make sure they're all tight to spec and make sure we don't over tighten them, because there's gonna be nothing worse than over tightening them, stripping the thread, and they'll be impossible to get out. Okay, so now I've got all the spark plugs in, they've been anti-seized and they're all done hand tight. So I want to go back to my book now and see what the torque spec is to spec down these spark plugs. So in the book here, it says 25 Newton meters, which is not a huge amount of force. So I'm going to get my torque wrench, spec these to 25 Newton meters, and we should be good to go. Now I understand not everybody's gonna have something like a torque wrench. These are a great tool to have because it means you can be really precise with all the bolts you are putting back into the car to make sure you don't under tighten or over tighten something. You don't have to use one of these, but like I said, it is something that I always suggest. So I'm gonna set this to 25 Newton meters and we're gonna torque down all the spark plugs. Okay, so the spark plugs are all done. We're gonna get the ignition leads, chuck them back into the engine, and then all we have left to do, change out our air filter and fill it up with new oil. That's it. So let's do that now. Now this is why I like labeling my ignition leads, because I know that this one's number 2, this one's number 3, which means they both sit right here. That's it. Get them seated, get them over the spark plugs. I'm gonna have to get number 3 seated and then I'll bolt number 2 down before we do number 1 and 4. Okay, we don't need this anymore. Okay, so I've got all the ignition leads in. We've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. All of the bolts have been tightened down. So these are pretty much ready to go. Now I should have mentioned this at the start. There are 2 cables that I undid before I took any spark plugs out. There's a lead that attaches here, and this provides power to the spark plugs. So this goes to number 2, and then there's one here that connects to number 4. So just make sure there's no power running to your spark plugs before you take them out. You don't have to disconnect the battery because there will be a cable that plugs directly into the harness of your ignition cables, but make sure that's disconnected so there's no power running through them because that is always a bad time. So now that these have all been reinstalled correctly, we're gonna click these harness cables back in, which is gonna provide power back to our spark plugs when we need them. They're both done. So now we're on the home stretch. All we need to do now is open up the air box and put our new air filter in and fill our engine with our brand new oil. So let's take apart our air box and I'll show you how to change that. So with the Lancer, it's really, really easy to work out where the air box is because it's the big square thing with the tube that runs to the front of the car that's sucking in the air. Some cars will be harder to work out exactly where it is, but that's where you look at your owner's manual and see exactly where the placement is, or you can do a quick Google search and I'm sure you'll find some photos or some videos showing exactly where your airbox is for your certain kind of vehicle. So with the Lancer specifically, it is really, really easy to open up your airbox. You have to undo these 2 latches. That allows you to move this free, and then inside the 2, it gets sandwiched right in between. There is our air filter. Let's see if we can squeeze this out without having to take anything else apart. So here we go. Here is our air filter. And this actually looks really, really good still. It doesn't look like there's any real debris inside of here. So I think we might even chuck this one back in here and keep using this for the time being. I honestly thought it would be way worse than it is. So instead of wasting another air filter, I think we'll reuse this for the time being. And then on the next service cycle, we'll check it again, make sure it's still good to go. And we've got a spare for when that time comes. So we'll chuck this one back in there and keep using this one. When you're buying things for a service like air filters, it is always probably a good thing to check first. I obviously didn't because every time I get to Super Cheap Auto, I like spending more money than I have. So I bought one. But if you are planning to do a service, I'd always suggest check that first. If it does look like it needs to be replaced, it's not hard to take it out and put it back in. If your car does have a really, really hard airbox to find and get into and things like that, maybe take a gamble. They're not the most expensive things to buy. I think a new air filter costs about $25 or $35, but again, depends on what you want to do and what you want to spend. So now we've drained all of our oil, changed our oil filter, taken out and replaced all of our spark plugs and made sure they're all torqued down to spec. We've replaced our air filter. So all we need to do now is fill up our car with the brand new oil and give her a test run. Now, one of the easiest ways to find out exactly how much oil you need for your car is to always check your manual. My Haynes manual tells me exactly how many liters I need to fill this car, including the filter, but it's always a good thing to check first. If you don't have that information or if you can't find that information, one of the easiest ways is to add, say, 1 or 2 liters and then take out your dipstick, see how much oil is reading on the dipstick, and then keep going from there. The last thing you want to do is overfill with oil and you don't want to underfill. So finding the right level on your dipstick, or you can go with the first option, find the information you need before you start filling the engine. So for me, I know that I need 3.8 liters of oil to fill the entire engine as well as the oil filter. So our brand new Penrite oil that we're using, this is a 5 liter container. I've already used the smallest amount to put inside the oil filter. So we're gonna have a look at the indicator line on the side of this bottle to see exactly when we've used about 3 liters of oil. We're gonna check the dipstick, and then we're gonna fill to the 3.8 liter capacity. So obviously you wanna try and use a funnel. Luckily with this bottle, it actually comes with this spout attachment, so it makes it a hell of a lot easier for us to get it into the engine. But use a funnel, make sure you don't make a mess. And once you've got some oil in the car, you wanna go back underneath and make sure the oil filter and the drain plug are not leaking, because there's nothing worse than having that leak as soon as you start filling it and covering the garage with oil. So let's start to fill her up. All right, so I've just filled it up to the 3.8 liter capacity. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna open up our dipstick, give it a wipe, chuck it back in, and see exactly where the oil level is sitting. And I can see that that is exactly where it needs to be. So we're gonna chuck the dipstick back in. We're gonna put the oil fill cap on, tighten that down. And now all we have to do is take the sticky tape off these ignition leads, turn the car over, and see how she goes. All right, here we go. Moment of truth. Oh, perfectamundo. I have no idea how loud that was for you guys, but she runs. She starts perfectly, and knowing exactly how this was starting with the old spark plugs, this is a world of difference. I don't know if you guys are gonna be able to notice, but I noticed straight away. The minute we fired it up, perfect. So there you go, all done. All I have to do now is jack the car back up, take the car stands out, drop her down, and let her run for a bit. I want that oil to circulate through the engine, get nice and warm, make sure it's everywhere and coating all the components that we want to protect, and that's it. Good to go. I can't tell you how satisfying it is to finally have this service finished. It's taken me weeks just because it's hard to find hours to do the work, but no more excuses, it's done. I'm very happy. So I hope you guys have learned something, and I hope you enjoyed going along this adventure with me, because I had lots of fun. If you guys like this video, don't forget to leave it a thumbs up. Also subscribe. I post new content every week and you don't want to miss it. If you guys enjoy watching these Lancer videos and you want to see more content like this, don't forget to leave me a comment below and let me know what you think. If you guys would like to come and join any of our live streams, I'll leave all the information in the description. I'd love to have you there. If you guys want to find us on any of our other social media, I'll leave all the links in the description below. Let me know you found this video. I'd love to have you as part of the team. Other than that, guys, I'm going to leave you to it. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.